Welcome back to the podcast, guys. This week, we're going to talk about sub-publishers. These are basically music libraries that are contracted by your primary music library. So let's say you're in the US, you submit your music to Library A. Well, Library A might have 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 different sub-publisher libraries or catalogs. You can call them two different things. And these are companies that are spread out throughout the entire world. So not only could you be represented in the US market with your US library, but through their sub-publishing partners, your music can get into the world, into multiple markets all over the world. This has been a huge source of my personal income, is having international royalties. A lot of people don't even realize. They think, you know, I'm going for the US market because I want to get on US TV programs and get US royalties. Absolutely, lots of money, lots of potential there. But do not discount the power of getting your tracks into Brazil, Germany, Japan, Sweden, Denmark, Canada, Mexico, you name it. I've had royalties. I have to actually count it up, and I know it's over 40 or 50 countries in my career. And some are little. I've definitely gotten those royalty checks. It's like 1 penny from Denmark. Like, thank you guys for sending that over. I really appreciate that. But I've also gotten, I remember a couple of royalty checks in particular. I think it was Brazil, where I was stacking up into the thousands upon thousands of dollars for tracks that I had composed years before. So for some reason, one of the sub-publishers down there got a hold of one of my albums that I had with my US library, and they just placed it all over the place in sports programs and that kind of thing. So, and it's happened in multiple territories throughout the world. So this is a huge thing to be aware of, and we need to dive into the ins and outs of what a sub-publisher is, what their job is, and basically how a library works with them and how they contract with them. And of course, the ultimate focus of this is how you, the composer, the producer, can benefit from these kind of arrangements. So as usual, I'm joined today by Mike and Trevor. Trevor, I think we'll start with you today because you've been doing a lot of work recently actually securing a new sub-publisher partner that you've been working with. And you now, I think you can say that your music will be very shortly, if not already, in pretty much every market and every country around the world, okay? So Trevor has definitely got some credibility and some experience in terms of building up his catalog, his library from scratch, from literally there was nothing there, to now having his tracks distributed in every potential market throughout the world. So maybe, Trevor, if you could walk us through that process and how that all works.
Yeah. So I'll do it in a way where, because most of the viewers at the moment are like listening to this are going to be composers and you know, vocalists, writers, you know, all that stuff. So from their end, it's actually like an extreme bonus because they don't get anything, not much anyway, cut from their like royalties and stuff, because writer royalties are virtually untouched as they pass through, like, let's say the Sweden PRO to the US PRO. I think depending on the country, there's a little bit like taken off the top and then passed through, but it's not anything crazy. Plus exchange rates and taxes and all that tariffs, you know, but that's in every industry, the transition money from one country to another. So when your music, as you're a composer, is in a library, say like mine, and my library is being repped by a sub-publisher. So I guess the first question is, what is a sub-publisher, right? So in the US, we have publishers. Well, to us, anybody outside of the US would be considered a sub-publisher because they're taking our music and publishing, like sub-publishing it along with other people, but only in their territory. So we'll use like China or Japan as for example.
Yeah, maybe not China right now. Yeah.
They're at a halt. A lot of countries are at a halt, but we'll just say Japan at the moment. Let's say there's some company that is a music library representation company where they do what we all know libraries in the US do, right? They go to the broadcast networks, they go to TV, movies, TV shows, all that fun stuff, and they go and they try to get music placed. Well, we have the music, but we're in the US. So what we say is, hey, you take a cut of whatever it is off the top from our end. So GID would, like let's say our deal is a certain percentage deal. So let's say they play something in Japan on some Japan sitcom or some Japanese sitcom or something. They take their cut. Then it shows up in the US, and then the US takes its cut, and then you have, what's left over as the publisher. That all of those cuts are essentially paying them for their work, because I'm not going to me or any employee of mine or whatever is not going to go to Japan and go pitch stuff. It would actually not make a lot of sense for me to hire somebody who speaks Japanese, go to Japan, try and get relationships with the Japanese broadcasters and all that kind of stuff, it makes sense for just me to go, okay, you company that already does this every day anyway, take my music, take a cut when you land it, because taking a cut is better than nothing at this point. And then they have access to my music, and they'll take their cut and then send the rest over to us. And that's true usually, depending on the company's deal with the sub publisher. They'll take some cut off the sync and probably some cut off the publishing, but they will not be taking any cut off the writing because they can't do that. And so for the composers, it's great because essentially the libraries are making deals with their music, and all they got to do is just wait. And one of the things, like when I first started GID, like once I hit a certain album total, I started hitting up those sub-publishers, because the one thing that we all kind of know is foreign royalties, foreign payments, foreign everything, really. When I say foreign, I mean outside of the home territory. Like we would be foreign to a UK library, right? So that stuff takes forever, right? Even like sync payments might take like 6 months to come from that territory, and then your guys' royalties take like a year to maybe 2, depending on like how long it comes back around. So as writers, when you're looking at a library, and I actually have told a few libraries this too, or a few composers, is like, hey, check out when you go to a library's website, which I actually need to do. I need to update a whole bunch on my website. But a lot of these libraries, they'll list their sub-publishers. They'll list like what countries, who is repping them in what countries on their website. And if you go to a library and you just see a huge list of sub-publishers, that's a good thing for you, because that means when you deliver your album to them, you are also delivering your album to all those other countries.
Absolutely. I remember being at the Sync Summit panel, and it was Sinead Hartman, who was the VP of, I think, BMG Production Music. And she actually even said that to everybody on stage, and say like, yeah, when you work with us, you're working with pretty much the whole world. And it's one of the benefits of sync licensing, working with a production music library, that I think you probably won't find with many sync agents. Maybe there are sync agents out there that do that. But as far as I understand, if you go with a sync agent, you're basically just going with that one person or that one team, and any of their relationships they happen to have. They probably aren't going to have an international network of sync agents that are all pitching your music in various territories all over the world. So with production music libraries, like what I've been teaching you guys and what I've been doing, you with one album, it's basically like, let's say you work with a US library and they have 10 sub-publishers in 10 different territories throughout the world, which can certainly happen. What you're essentially doing is you're basically putting out 11 albums. It's pretty much what you're doing, because you put one album out for the US, but it's almost like you put out 10 other albums in 10 different markets all throughout the world. And just like Trevor said, you're not having to pay them any money to shop your music for you. They're taking a cut off of the publisher side, which is usually going to be split in some manner with the library. So you as the composer, I know this is why I sleep so great at night, because I know that I have dozens and dozens and dozens of people all over the world that I've never met, don't know who they are. They are incentivized to shop my music for me. And one of the things, again, the concept that I've talked about so many times about, when you sign with a library and it's like, oh, they want to take all my publishing. You should never sign over your publishing. This panic that a lot of people get to. This example that Trevor just laid out for you guys, I hope you see that, like why he, 12 years into this business, is also seeing the value of sometimes splitting the back end, right? And giving up a portion of his income to the right kind of people, because he knows, what am I going to do? Get on a plane and fly to these countries and try to work my way into a country where I don't know the culture, I don't know the language, I don't have any contacts? No, it's a much shorter path to success by just saying, you know what, I'm going to incentivize you who already have the relationships, you've already got the infrastructure, you've got the business contacts to be able to get these things placed. I want to incentivize you. I want you to get rich off of our music. And so that way we win. It's a win-win kind of a thing. You have to have this team mindset in this business, because if you think you're the only one that's going to make money off of your licensing career, you're dreaming. You just are absolutely dreaming. It takes a whole village to get this thing to work together. So you have to be willing to partner with the right kinds of libraries. Now, it doesn't mean that somebody wants to take your publishing, therefore, okay, I'll just say yes to it. You got to make sure you've done your research, they're a good fit for you, you feel like your music is right for them. But always keep that in your head, that like incentivizing those that you work with to become wealthy with you, not off of you. It's not getting rich off of your work, but getting rich with you, right? They're getting wealthy with the work that you've submitted to them. That's the key to success. And that's how I've been able to do this full time. That's the only way. If I had always said, no, I don't like anybody taking any of my income, no, I'm not going to sign over any publishing, or no, none of this, there's no way that I'd have anything to say or do about the sync licensing. I would have just bailed out and gone somewhere else. And there would have been plenty of other people that would have happily take my spot, right, wherever I was. So it's just one of these, mindset shifts. We have to be aware of this stuff. This has to be something that we are considering moving forward. So, Mike, now I know that in your library, you don't work with sub-publishers yet, but you are certainly considering it. Maybe you can talk to us about, why you are now opening that door and what value you see in bringing somebody like that on board.
Yeah, so we've opened up as mainly a boutique library that's really servicing advertising, trailers, that sort of thing. So in that market, from what we've known, there hasn't really been much in the ways of royalties. On the back end is usually like a large upfront sync fees, and then of course we also do a lot of custom work. So essentially, our business was mostly geared toward custom work first, and then with the catalog to kind of fill in the gaps. So for us, basically, we of course everything changed with a whole COVID-19 situation. And so the biggest things that we saw that change for us was, there's just been a downturn in advertising budgets and stuff like that during this time of uncertainty. So we started looking around at, okay, well, what else can we do with our music? And, we don't really have TV film clients, so we don't really do TV shows. So we started looking into, basically killing two birds with one stone, looking into sub-publishers in other countries, to get our music out in that network. But then also, they are connected with TV shows, or predominantly doing TV shows and films, stuff like that, stuff that can generate royalties for us and also for our composers. So at the moment, we're in talks with a couple of companies in Europe, actually, that do Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and then also the UK. So that's something that we're opening up into, and we're looking into Asia. And Australia, stuff like that as well. And again, it's mostly for getting us and our music into not only just physical territories and physical markets that our music wouldn't normally get into, but also different media that we don't normally pursue.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And you're obviously in a transitional period right now to kind of figure out some new content you obviously can start to serve with the changing environment that we're in. So you're obviously seeing the value of that. Now, I do want to talk to you, each one of you guys, too, about your composer experience with sub-publishers, not necessarily as library owners now, but as composers. I kind of shared mine in the beginning of this, just basically talking about how I remember that was a thought of it'd be kind of cool to also get royalties from other countries, but I didn't realize the significance of what that income can really look like, and how you can not only get syndicated placements. And what I mean by that is that if, for me, example, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, I've had I think 7 or 8 episodes of my tracks placed on that show, and I earned the royalties when it was here in the States. But that show airs in multiple territories all throughout the world. I think Japan, Sweden, and Germany for sure. There might have been others as well. And so pretty much every quarter, I'm always seeing new royalties, sometimes here in the US because it still airs, on different platforms, but also in international territories. So you're basically getting that kind of syndication money, which is that golden money that you really want to get, because that's the stuff that just can last quarter after quarter, year after year, because one placement is just constantly feeding you. It's just constantly giving you some new income. But you can also get new placements in foreign countries that you didn't get in the US. So there might be, for me in Brazil, I think it was a soccer program. I'm actually not even sure, but there was a bunch of some sort of a sports program that aired, and it used 1 or 2 of my songs over and over and over and over again. So this is stuff that never aired in the US, but this was actually a foreign TV show where my tracks, again, placed, never met the people, I've been to Brazil, but let's take Germany. I've never been to Germany, still getting original placements over in these countries that I've never even been to. So that's exponentially powerful for your income, right? To actually be able to get placements in markets and territories you've never even been, you don't even know these people, but your tracks are in the system. They're out there potentially getting placed. That's why we can't control any of that as composers, but what we can control is making sure that we have the highest quality, most licensable stuff that at least we send to our first library partner. So then when it gets distributed out to their network, we have a shining gem, of a track, of an album, of whatever we put out there that really does, not only it sounds great, but it's also marketed properly, right? Having a good track title, making sure they're themed in the appropriate way in terms of having all the same kind of a genre sort of thing. But a lot of different details for that. But it's really, focusing on what you can control in terms of your quality output, making sure you have good quality control before you submit it to your library. So, Trevor, I know, but years before you were doing, get it done with your library, you were also a composer and working on that side of the industry. So maybe you can talk some of your experiences as a composer working with sub-publishers.
Yeah. Well, as a composer, I didn't really work directly with any of them, but I will say a cool kind of a bonus to the whole sub-publisher thing is that I know a lot of people who do genres that aren't always the most popular in the US, or they're kind of popular in the US, but maybe other countries really have a need for them. Because like you said earlier, some of these countries are culturally different and have all these different types of programming, different types of things they just want to watch in general, and so things that can do okay in the US can really shine in other countries. And so having kind of an understanding of if you're one of the composers who maybe one or two different types of genres that are a little more niche, yeah.
Both,
and
yeah.
and you go to US libraries and they're just kind of you know what, we don't really need that because none of the show's here. Well, having that conversation of, oh, well, this stuff I've seen, some of this will be long-term of looking at your royalties from the past and being you know what, that album I did, that was kind of that weird stuff, did really well in Denmark or something like that. You could then have those conversations of hey, this type of music I noticed does really good in this country, or even maybe ask some of the libraries, if somebody were to ask me, for example, Korea, I have a rep in Korea, have for a couple of years, and what really does well in Korea is really, at least with that sub-publisher, with the types of clients they have, is some of that kind of happy, bouncy, guitar-y stuff. And same for some reason in Israel, I could see some of my download stats, and a lot of download stats in Israel for some reason is that same kind of solo guitar or guitar with one or two other.
Uh-oh. We lost Trevor for a second. He'll come back. Let's see what happens here. Hold on. He froze on us. Yep, he's out. Are you there? There he is.
Hey.
He's back.
Yeah, it just went black. I don't know.
Happened to me before as well. And now you have two of you. One of you is frozen, the other one's live. So we've got clones of Trevor. All right, go ahead. Keep going.
You can never have too many of me, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so there's these certain, either genres or types of tracks or whatever that do well in different countries. And you can kind of be a little more proactive and look at what you do and where it might do well, and then take that into consideration when talking to a library or working on your next album. If you're, because there's certain things that do really well in the US and it's constantly doing well. But if you are kind of in that zone where you're they wanted that one from me, but they haven't really asked for any of that, and that's really what I do, either finding a library or working with the current library you're working with and be look, I've noticed this does really well in these territories that you are in. I would like to keep making this kind of stuff because I could see it come back around. And it's valuable for them because the sub-publishers clearly need more of it. And so I would say that's kind of a cool little thing, for composers, like I said, to have that niche kind of thing going on, is that you can pay attention to those markets and not have to be kind of just tied to the US market all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. Now your clone dropped off there for some reason. Anyways, Mike, how about you? Any experiences as a composer working with sub-publishers?
Yeah, so basically all the way back to the beginning, let's just start with kind of so my mindset as a composer, first off, has always been to get jobs. So even with library music and royalties, I've always seen those royalty checks in the beginning, especially come in as being kind of free money, sort of oh, this is cool. This is something I've done. It's not something I'm pursuing right this second because I'm looking for jobs. So the funny thing is when I was getting a bunch of, so I used to have a bunch of music in Jersey Shore. With this company, and I remember years later after Jersey Shore was done, I remember seeing a whole bunch of titles just pop up in my ASCAP account, and and it was just from publishers in other countries and stuff like that. And I remember calling my publisher and being like, do you guys know about this? Because I had no idea about like sub-publishing, how it worked or anything like that at the time. And I was just like thinking, I was like, wait, is somebody just like, this is music that's exclusive to you guys in your library. Is somebody taking our music? What's going on? And then, they finally explained to me, it's like, oh, no, like all these tracks are, we've just signed these sub-publishing deals all over the world. So you're going to be seeing a whole bunch of those. So cool thing about that is all those tracks that I had placed in Jersey Shore now started to be placed in, I guess the UK's version was Geordie Shore, so it was like the same stuff that kind of happened on that. And then like other reality shows all throughout Europe started to use like a bunch of my music that was, first used in America. And then so essentially like what I thought would be like, oh, this is great music for 1 or 2 seasons here, right, ended up being royalties for years and years as they kept getting picked up in other countries. So for me, and it's like, basically no work, I did the work making the music, submitting it the first time around. And then, and again, like I said, I'm still pushing for jobs myself. So, any royalties that come back from that, as big or small as they are, was a bonus for me. I was like, okay, great. And then more royalties, big or small coming off of these other countries, and as they come was just just prolonged. Like it was enough to almost be like, oh wait, this is no longer bonus, this could be income, and I think that's really been my experience with at first I was apprehensive, and sometimes, like you said before, like especially when I signed that first exclusive deal and I was like, oh, I'm giving up my publishing, what is, and that was back, was it mid 2000s? So in an era when everyone's just like, no, don't give up your publishing. And, it's like that every like music expert was like, saying that, and always do covers, that was like the big thing back then. Right. But I was just like, well, at that time, my thought was just like, well, they seem to, be able to get my stuff in places where I can't myself. So I'll let them do it, because I don't want to do it. And it really paid out, so over the years they did it here, and then, as it goes around the world, then that's just more royalties that I get to collect on for doing absolutely no more work than I initially did.
That's the name of the game, passive income, man. It's a beautiful thing when you can get into that game. I have one last question before we wrap this one up, and maybe Trevor, I'll look to you probably maybe more for guidance on this. So there will be, most people listening and watching this are going to be US based, but we do have a large audience of people from all over the world. Now, a lot of US libraries obviously have sub-publishers like yours, all over the world. How common is it, let's say if somebody was in Germany to sign with a German music library, that they also would be sub-publishing out to the US and out to other countries? Is it vice versa, or is it usually always work with the US sub-publishing outwards?
No, yeah, for sure. There are plenty of libraries. I would even say most sub-publishers I've heard of have a library or two with themselves, and then they kind of do a reversal, where like we'll just use like French, like for example, a French library might have, or a French sub-publisher might have their own little library of whatever it is. Maybe it's just random tracks, maybe it's like French specific music, like whatever it is that they have, they own it. They will also go the other way. Well, they'll try and get it into a US sub-publisher for themselves, because everybody's kind of in the game already anyway, so why not? And then they do the same thing on the other way around. So for people who are in France or in the UK or in some of these other places, that you don't need to start trying to get into the US market and go outwards. You can start in your own market, which depending on maybe not at this moment, but actually meet these people and stuff like that. And you're near them, you can speak their language, and start there and then spread outwards. And a lot of times too, if your stuff is good, and I've seen this before, let's say, I just keep using French as an example. Let's say you're a composer in France, and the library doesn't need the genre you do, but they rep a library that does the genre that you do. So if France doesn't need, let's say, trance for some reason, but you do trance music, they might look at you and be like, oh, well, we don't need it for our personal library, but this library that we represent in the US, they like taking on trance music. So let me link you up with them. That sometimes is a good way to kind of open doors as well, because if I'm a publisher and my sub-publisher sends me an email with somebody CC'd on it saying, hey, here's a great composer, take a listen. Like I'll listen because I trust them as a sub-publisher. So that way, you don't have to be in the US to start like going in and spreading out like that.
Yeah, and in situations like that, you also wouldn't be probably losing much of anything, even if you had to go through your local France library to get to the U.S. catalog, because usually they're going to be splitting their publishing on the back end, which you usually are not going to be touching anyways in this industry. I know some libraries will, usually non-exclusive ones will give you a little piece of that. But mostly exclusive ones, it's like you keep your writers, they keep the publishing. So if you say, well, I don't want to have a middleman, I don't want my French library to be in between me and this library, like what, you're not losing anything. You're basically just getting granted access to this library where you don't have to directly go pitch to them. They've already got the relationship set up. So I just want to make sure you guys are clear on that sometimes middlemen will take a cut and you'll lose a little bit of your income from that. But in situations like that, most of the time you're not going to, because they're going to be between themselves negotiating what they're going to be giving to each other from their side of the income, not from the writer share, as Trevor pointed out. So
yeah, I will say on that too, depending on, this is a little bit getting into the numbers a little bit, but like if you're with a library who splits sync, which a lot of libraries are doing now, mine does that, where you're splitting some of the sync fee, you do get a little bit of the dilution from other countries, because sync will get split in one country, then another country, and then with you. And so that starts to kind of get diminished, but at the same time, it's like, well, it would have never happened anyway if it wasn't there. So some of that kind of gets diluted in there, but as far as like the writing, like the majority of the like negotiation is done with the publishing anyway. And so it's not something that really even affects you too much unless you're doing the sync share. And even then that's kind of just part of the gig is splitting that stuff to make things happen. But yeah, if you were in France and you make a deal with a US library, it wouldn't really be much different than if you were to make it with the French one and then it'd be put in the US. So it doesn't make much of a change for you either way.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, absolutely, with the sync fees. I didn't know actually that. It makes sense, though, that if they get the placement, then it has to go through that library and then back finally to you. So absolutely, yeah, that would be one way where you would have a little bit of cutting the share of that. But again, it's this whole concept of like, do you want 100% of a grape or 50% of a watermelon or even 25% of a watermelon, right? So we always have to think it's not about necessarily a percentage, but it's really about what is the opportunity that you're going to be saying no to. Like keep 100% of your grape and run home with it, and keep that tiny little piece to yourself and watch somebody else take half or 25% of a massive watermelon. You will pretty quickly regret that choice to go like, man, I wish I wasn't so greedy. I wish I would just realize that like we all need to eat, right? Everybody's got families, everybody's got bills to pay, everybody's trying to be profitable here. And I'm an important part of this process, right? We as composers, as producers, we are very important here. We are very, very important. But so is the library, and so is a sub-publisher, and so is the TV client, and so is ASCAP and BMI. This, again, it's a team sport. We need each other right now. And yes, everybody in that equation will make big mistakes, including us, guys. We are not perfect here as composers and producers. We make big mistakes as well. So we can't always just look to other people to say, well, they're the ones that always screw it up, and I don't like this, I don't like that. We're all in this, basically. We don't think about it as a team sport, but it really is a team sport. And even though I haven't met most of the people on my team, they are my team members. They're the people that I really am thankful for, that they're out there really hustling and pitching my music. So I just want to end with that really positive note. Make sure that you guys are aware of that consideration moving into this industry. If you can't get your head around that, if that is just too much for you to swallow, you're like, nope, I'm never giving my publishing up. I'm not going to, even negotiate with sub-publishing or any of that kind of stuff. Probably put the brakes on the whole business. I don't think this is going to be a business that you'll really thrive in. I think you need to find something else maybe that you can have a lot more maybe just personal control over and not be in this industry, because this industry, it's so decentralized, it's so spread out throughout the entire world that you cannot be a one-man band. You just can't do everything yourself. You have to rely on other people to help you get to where you want to go. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.